please give a warm welcome to Elisabeth Samuels.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Tech support. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for coming. It's nice to see some familiar and friendly faces in the audience, and I appreciate all of you coming to hear me talk. And I would like to also thank Hallwalls for providing this forum for people to come and hear talks of all different kinds. I come to a lot of programming at Hallwalls, and coming to hear scientists and architects, poets, writers, musicians, people from lots of different disciplines. I think listening to people talk about things that they feel strongly about provides opportunities for connections, which I think is a really important thing. And I would like to thank John for inviting me to be part of this Curator series and for his nice introduction, and to tell him that he took away some of the things I was going to say, but that's okay. My first little disclaimer is to tell you that I am not a public speaker, and my preferred form of communication is kind of one-on-one or a small group, and even then, it's questionable, communication. But I'm thinking I've got a lot of really good images, and with your patience and kindness, I think we're going to get through this. So, I titled my talk "I Had No Choice," and it's not quite as bleak as that might first appear. It's the answer to a question that I have been asked often over the years, and particularly more early on, which was, why would you or anyone open a small independent gallery in Buffalo, New York? And that was my answer, and I hope that as this talk progresses, it will be more clear what my intentions were. So this first slide is a small collection of aphorisms that thoughts that filter through my head often, and these are just a very few of the thoughts. The day is coming when a single carrot freshly observed will set off a revolution. Art is not a thing, it's a way. I want my life to be my art. So just thoughts that kind of give a little bit of insight into things I think about. So I can't remember a time when I didn't think that art was important, and in a kind of zealous evangelical way, that I didn't think other people should think that too. I think that it is a humanizing element, that it's a reflection of our culture, that we're all supposed to surround ourselves with it, and I believe that strongly. So, whether it's making it yourself, or going to museums, galleries to look at it, to have talks, conversations about it, all of those things have always kind of made my heart beat a little bit faster. I grew up in Chicago, and it was at a pretty early age that I figured out the bus and the train I needed to take to get myself to the Art Institute, and I spent a lot of time wandering in that incredible institution. And I just have really vivid memories of time spent there, and I'm just going to, share just a couple of the ones that stick out really strongly to me. One was there's a collection of Thorn Room miniatures, which are these incredible little reproductions of period pieces that show interiors from the 13th century until 1930. And part of the appeal was that it was in like a lower level of the museum, kind of off in a corner, and it was in this narrow passageway, and the room was intentionally dark, only lit, the only things that were lit were the little vignettes, and so it was very magical, and details to the point where when you not only was the furniture and the wallpaper and everything exact replicas, but they would replicate time of day. So like the specific light, if it was a late afternoon light, would be filtered through the lace curtains in the parlor. Just kind of magical memories. And that, and walking through the Byzantine vessels and paintings, and stopping and coming upon for the first time Seurat's Le Grand Jatte, which is this massive pointillist painting that if you've been lucky enough to see it, it just does not compare to seeing it in a reproduction in a book. And then walking up one of the side marble staircases to look up to see George O'Keeffe's huge cloud painting that was, used to be at the top. So all of these, are kind of etched deeply into my psyche and many more. And, they were just really formative experiences. So I went to school to be a painter, and my nod to practicality was to get certified as an art teacher, which turns out that I actually enjoyed quite a bit as well. But when I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, I was lucky enough to get a job at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, which at the time was a smaller museum and was an incredible opportunity to experience all that it took to run a small museum. So I had the chance to to work with a preparator, to do installation, to do research on collections, to write correspondence to artists, to do condition reports. It's kind of all hands on deck, whatever it takes to make it happen. And so it was a great experience. And we also just had an amazingly eclectic collection of exhibitions while I was there. So I'm just going to show you just a couple of them because they were kind of wonderful. So Simon Sparrow was a street preacher, and the museum is located on State Street in Madison, and that was his turf. So he would move his talking space down the street periodically, trying to save us and tell us that God is the way. And at the same time, he was just this incredibly interesting man. He was born in West Africa and grew up on a Cherokee reservation. And he believed in the power of art. And he thought that these pieces that he created were the human embodiment of spirituality. So they were paintings and found object collages. And the one thing that they had in common was that they always were sparkly. So another amazing exhibition we had was Owen Morel, and a lot of people might be familiar with his piece that's at Art Park, Omega, which is this dizzying installation that cantilevers over the Niagara Gorge, the escarpment, and it's just like a breathtaking piece. And unfortunately, nobody is allowed to walk up it anymore, but originally you could walk up to the deck up there. In any case, we had smaller scale sculptures and photographs of other installations. And another name that's familiar because of a piece that he has at the Aubrey Knox, which I'm told is one of the most popular and often asked for pieces in their permanent collection. But Lucas Samaras had a show, it was called Dreams in Dust, and they were these beautiful kind of jewels of pastels, a large series of beautiful pieces. And occasionally we were, incredibly lucky enough to have the artists travel with exhibitions. And in this case, Christo and Jean-Claude came when we had an exhibition of Running Fence. And it was just an extraordinary experience to be able to meet them and to feel the incredible energy and excitement that they had for their work, and the dreams that they had that they made into reality, these incredible structures. This Running Fence actually, hard to find a favorite because I love so many of their pieces, but this, incredible line that traverses the landscape is just, so beautiful. But Christo was interesting. Well, he talked about the ephemeral quality of the installations and how, temporary they were, and so how much more significant they felt to appreciate them, because knowing that they would be gone quickly. And, he talked about hating computers. A quote was, "Everything is virtual there, nothing is real. All our projects involve real things, real wind, real sun, real wet, real danger, real drama. This is very invigorating to me." And I think, I think he's 80 now, and they're just putting together a project in Italy where he is, you get to walk on water, which sounds, incredibly fabulous. So the exhibition also included sketches and plans for the piece. And then we also had a show of Georgia O'Keeffe, which, her exhibitions are always kind of blockbuster crowd pleasers. And she happens to be not a native son, but a native daughter. She was born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, which added to the appeal to the crowds that came for this exhibition. She actually has a show coming up either now or soon at the Tate Modern in London. So her work, obviously is loved all over the place. But I must say that it was an incredible feeling to, hold one of her pieces in my arms as we were installing the show. Just, very exciting. So when we left Madison, I lived in Michigan for a short time, and I taught at the Art Institute there and was doing my own work and showing work at the time. And then we moved to Buffalo in the late 80s. And, I, like many people who come here, was incredibly impressed with the Albright Knox and the amazing collection that they have, and the Birchfield, and, the not-for-profits, Hallwalls and SEPA and Big Orbit. And also I was, really impressed by the number of artists and the quality of the work that was being created in the city. But what I found disappointing was that there didn't seem to be a lot of opportunities for artists to show their work or for the community to see it. And I found that, frustrating. Also, I was really disappointed to find out that New York City was so far away. Apparently, I had not looked at a map before we moved. But it was not long after moving here that I met Mark Goldman, who, for those of you who don't know who he is an urban pioneer who has worked in different areas of the city to resurrect neighborhoods and create new life and business districts. And he had recently purchased this building on the corner of Franklin and Chippewa, a beautiful building, and it was his intention to turn it into the Calumet Arts Cafe, music, good food, and art. And so I got invited to have a storefront in the space, and Calumet Gallery was born. And I was still in the process of becoming familiar with the artists in the area, and so I went to Bethune Hall, which at the time was the graduate students' studios. And an amazing building, and they had fabulous studios there. Unfortunately, not as nice since they got moved to the North Campus, but it was really amazing. And now the building is condominiums. But I was also really lucky because there were some really impressive students that year. So Gerardo Tan, who was a Fulbright scholar here from the Philippines, was one of those, and I had an exhibition of his work. Peter Arvidsson, a really wonderful painter who now lives in Boston and shows his work there. It was the first time I had the privilege of meeting William Cooper, an artist in our community who recently passed away, and his just incredible, vibrant paintings, and to get to know this really kind man a bit. And it was also the first time I met Catherine Parker, somebody whose work that I loved and showed very often through the different iterations of my galleries, and was somebody who would become a really close friend. Another place that I used to go and look for work was the sales and rental. When the sales and rental gallery at the Albright Knox had calls for work, they would they would line up all of the work that had been brought in the auditorium. So the walls and the seats were all kind of lined with leaning pieces, and so I used to go and look, and Mark Levitelli's work caught my eye, and this is early work, and I showed his work at the Calumet, and have also consistently showed it whenever I have the chance. So at that time, I was also teaching at Empire State College and at the Albright Knox, and for a little bit at Buff State, and it was a period of time when arts funding was being cut all over the place, and more than usual. I mean, it's always being cut. But, art classes in schools were being eliminated. Even the Albright Knox stopped having classes for a period of time. And so a dear friend, colleague, artist, and educator, Claire Post, and I would talk, frustratedly about the circumstance, and try to think of ways to counteract what was going on. And the first thing we did was to start an artist in residency program at Park School, which was great. And we brought in a lot of interesting artists to work within the school setting. And I think the program still exists now. We did get funding for it, so that was great. And but that wasn't enough. And after another discussion, we looked at each other and we said, well, maybe we should just start a little school. And so we went looking for a space, and we found this, quirky little storefront on Bryant Street, and Bryant Street Studio. So we did classes for children and adults, and it was soon after moving into the space that we realized it could also be a gallery, and what a wonderful opportunity to have people, working on their own, exploring things, and being surrounded by other people's work. So these are Catherine Parker paintings that were in at the time. And the next image that I'm showing is just an indicator of the passage of time. So these sweet little children who used to come to some of the classes are now in college. So we were in that space for, about 5 years, when it felt like, we were kind of outgrowing it. And it was at the time when Annie Adams, who's a local entrepreneur, had just bought a building on Elmwood right across from the co-op. And she had this idea for a business model that was called the Neighborhood Collective. So a grouping of small businesses all under one roof to have a collective presence. And that's a philosophy that's dear to my heart, and so I was really excited with the prospect of joining this collection of businesses. And so Annie had her space in the front, which was a jewelry design, and Trudy Stern had True Teas, which is a much missed tea bar restaurant that was in the space as well. And then we had a space, there was a long driveway, and the back space, which was had previously been an auto body shop, and it had been converted into the gallery space in the front, in sight, and then 2 large classrooms, one of which was Bryant Street Studio, and the other was the Science Museum had a classroom called the Science Spot, and it was their intention to kind of break out, through the barriers of a museum and to embed themselves in a neighborhood. And it was a really great opportunity, and we did obviously a lot of collaborating. And then, as John mentioned, there were other small businesses like a masseuse in the back, and then Block Club had their first office space in what would take on a whole life of its own for them. So it was a great synergy, and when the gallery had openings, everybody else would open, and it was a really nice collective energy. So, when I started looking through images to pull some slides for this show, I was kind of overwhelmed by the number of exhibitions and artist work that that I had over the years, and so. Well, I did consider showing them all, but I thought perhaps, we might all fall asleep before the end of that. So I've just kind of very arbitrarily pulled out some from each location, and this is the first show that was in that space. It was called New Walls, New Work. Kathleen Sharon and Zerbi Sarovic, who is an artist from Rochester. And then there was a show of Gerald Mead's. It was called Small, Smaller, Smallest. And it was a really interesting juxtaposition because these walls were quite long and large, and these pieces are tiny. And there was also a really beautiful exhibition of the painter Nathan Netzger, who does, these very human portraits of people, and then poetic landscapes. And then, as John mentioned, let's see, because I wrote this down so I would get the actual title. This show by Bruce Adams, which actually is one of my favorite series of his, was called Paintings of Pictures of People with Paintings. And basically that's what it was. It was images of people looking at paintings and that he painted. And there were some pieces that were, maybe like 8 feet long, and these walls were perfect to show the work. So it came time to reinvent, and I was looking for a new space, and I wanted it to be a dedicated gallery space this time. And Allentown has always drawn my attention. I think it's a really intriguing neighborhood, and historically it's been kind of the creative, center of Buffalo. So when I found a storefront on Allen Street, I decided to move there, and Indigo Gallery was born. So this was the space. It had been a florist before, so after I removed a lot of stuff and painted and put in lights and painted the treads on the stair indigo, it was ready to go. And the first show was Lost Rose by Catherine Parker, and it was a gorgeous collection of recent work. It opened in the middle of October, and it was the gallery space in the back, you can kind of get a glimpse, had windows that went from the floor all the way up to the loft, and it just kind of looked out onto this, very narrow alleyway between the building and the next building. And amazingly, because it was kind of like a concrete jungle, there were these wild grapevines that grew up the side of the building and over the windows on the top. And just as the opening came up, the colors changed. And so on the night of the opening, there was this window that was filled with reds and oranges and magentas, and it was an amazing recreation of the colors that Catherine used in her paintings. It was just one of those beautiful moments. So this is an image of looking down in the gallery before the crowds came. And this is a shot of one of the reasons why I wanted to move to Allentown. I knew that in the past there had been attempts to have a collective presence, to have galleries opening at the same time, and I wanted to try to make that happen more. So, the idea of First Fridays exists across the country in different cities, different permutations, and I wanted to build on that for Allentown. And so I met with Barbara Hart from Studio Hart and Dale Schwallenberg at Buffalo Big Print and Mike Mully at College Street and a couple of other spaces and some merchants, and together we created this association called GAGA, Greater Allentown Gallery Association, and with the intention of trying to create events on the first Friday of every month that would allow people to just kind of informally walk from space to space without being intimidated, entering a gallery, and to provide, things happening on the streets. So oftentimes there's music and performance things and installations and just kind of a layering of experience in order to invite people to be part of art. So soon after Jackie Felix passed away, an incredible artist in the community, I had a conversation with her husband, Al, about the possibility of having an exhibition at the same time that the Birchfield was having their large retrospective. And so we decided that that would be a good idea, and it provided him opportunity to have more chance to read his poetry that he had written for her. And the show that we had at Indigo was called, let's see, So Much Uncertainty, and it was works on paper. And it was a really beautiful, this was not one of the images, but I just like this image, so I included it. So, there's always the question as to, how do you put an exhibition together, and, how do you make choices? And, it's a huge range of reasons why. Sometimes it's just, a person's work just, calls out. Sometimes it's thematic or materials based. In this instance, Synergy One, Monica Engel, Deborah Stewart, and Kathleen Sharon were three artists that worked in very different medium, monotypes, ceramics, and a different kind of printmaking. But their connecting thread was these very organic forms, and that was that. Nancy Belfer is an artist whose work I have always admired, as well as admiring the artist herself. She's a person who is continually reinventing herself, and she used to be she was a professor emeritus at Buff State, the head of the fibers department, and not only is her work, interesting and continually evolving, but every time I ever have her work in the gallery, there's always somebody who comes up to her and says, I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of your students. And so that kind of put the thought in my mind to go out and look and see what some of her students were doing. And so we had an exhibition called The Circle of Influence, which was this collection of obviously only a very small smattering of people who are practicing artists who were her students. And the interesting thing about this collection of work was that there was nobody in the mix who did work like Nancy's. So, she definitely was not creating disciples. I think she saw her role as, helping people find their own voice. And I think that was indicated in this. This is an exhibition, Jeffrey Vincent. It was the last show he had in town before he left to get his MFA. They were really large-scale, beautiful charcoal drawings that hung from the floor to the ceiling in the gallery. And then he left to get his MFA, and he's recently come back, and he's now curating Bach's Gallery on Main Street, and he's going to have a show at Indigo in October. So, collaboration is a really significant, really important to me, and so every time there's an opportunity, I try to do collaborations, and this was a collaborative venture with the Knife and Mark program, showing the artists who had been in that session. This was definitely a thematic connection, sentient beings, really different work by each of these artists, Polly Little, Lynn Northrup, Mary Weig, and Jacqueline Welch, but all dealing with the emotions and humanity of animals. Polly Little on the left and Jacqueline Welch on the right. We've also hosted a lot of different kinds of performance pieces, and Michelle Costa's work always amazes me. She creates these, elaborate scenarios and with music and marionettes, and they're beautiful. So this was a collaboration with the Buffalo Society of Artists. This was an exhibition that showed work of all past presidents, or a selection of. So this was a two-person show, Catherine Parker and Monica Engel, Juncture. both of these artists worked very differently, but this seemed like a point in time when there was this connection between the work that they were doing. And actually, the image on the left is Catherine Parker's, and the image on the right is Monica's. So they just seemed very interconnected at the time. This was an exhibition that highlighted the work of the design department at Buff State. So at the time, Joseph Bias, Sunhwa Kim, Tara Nahabetian, Stephen Saraceno, Carol Townsend, and Robert Wood. It was a really strong exhibition and really impressive that is the design department there. So these next couple of slides are just quick images of connected two-person shows, Beth Peterson and Susan Copley, with the connecting thread being that they were both working with fragmented images. This show, Dorothy Fitzgerald and Joyce Hill, both artists were working with kind of this dark and mysterious narrative, personal stories that we didn't really know, but still were beautiful. Then we hung a show of Tanya Zabinski. Most people are familiar with her screen printing, but this was a collection of images that she was putting together as a book, 25 Simple Ways to be a Peaceful Activist. Another exhibition of Mark Levitelli. These were encaustic monoprints, I think. As I mentioned, I show his work often. So this was an example of pulling people from different periods of time, different decades. Obviously, the figure was the connecting thread, but Kevin Kegler is a contemporary artist now, and Catherine Koenig, a much earlier painter, but her work is amazing. These egg tempera, incredible surfaces, beautiful. So then I was at the Birchfield at one point and saw this amazing exhibition that had a piece by Robert Hirsch in it, and I called him to talk to him about his work, and he's an incredibly interesting man, an artist, and a curator and an author. He's written a number of really significant books on photography. But this series was meant to be an homage to the 60s, and he, let me catch up to where I am. So defining moments of the 60s, all presented in 4x4x4 photo cubes, and the interrelation of historical images with memory and time. And we also had a 6-foot-tall turning, revolving plaster peace sign, and this was really amazing. We built this little black box room for this hypnotic dream machine that just kind of filtered colored light all around. It was very, kind of psychedelic 60s. And at the same time, SEPA had the other part of that exhibition, so it was another opportunity to have a collaboration, and just brought strength to both venues. So this was an exhibition, Polly Little and Catherine Lidger-Spetzer, entitled Sanctuary, and it was a question as what is sanctuary to those individual artists, and then as a viewer, where do you find sanctuary? This was a wonderful exhibition. The title, I Am Not What I Am What I Do With My Hands, is a quote from Louise Bourgeois, and it dealt with handwork, the much unappreciated work created by women over the years. And both of these artists, in their own way, would incorporate that into their own practice. This show, Crimson Thread, Amanda Bessel, Rosemary Lyons, and Ellen Markle, dealt with the Japanese philosophy that speaks to this connecting thread that ties us to all the people we're supposed to meet in our lives. And so all of the artists' work had loose attachments to that. Christina Siegel, some of you might be familiar with her work. She's a German artist who divides her time between here and Germany, and she does a lot of the set design for Torn Space Theater. So she did this installation in the gallery, which was kind of ghost images of a celebration. So these were the bottle and glasses were made out of stiffened organza, and were kind of the ghosts of a celebration. This was an interesting show. Richard Huntington, called Cottage Industry. It was a kind of tongue-in-cheek homage to Thomas Kincaid. And I was thrilled to be able to put this show together. It was, I think, the last time that Dwayne Hatchett was able to see his work in a gallery, and it also included the work of his sons, Dana and David, who works out of Florida. But it was a series of, really beautiful small-scale sculptures of Dwayne's, and also some paintings from the 60s, and then landscapes by Dana, and assemblages by David. And this was also another really strong show. Joseph Bias and Annie Hoover. In this instance, we decided to focus on black and white pieces. And both of these artists, are incredibly creative in terms of materials reuse and exploring, making you look at things in new ways. And this was one of Joseph's pieces, which involved knotting of these each individual strips of paper that he cut and then reassembled. Actually referencing a Japanese ceremony of making wishes with knots. And then this piece of Annie Hoover's, which was made out of plastic milk jug circles that amazingly resembled mother of pearl as the light hits them, and she's shown it in a lot of different configurations in different gallery settings, and it finally found its forever home in a private residence where we installed it crawling up a wall of this person's bedroom. John Dixon is an artist who I met when he came to visit Bob Hirsch's exhibition. He is from Toronto and does amazing work. I love his work, and he was in Beyond an Inn one year, and the more I saw of it, the more I worked to convince him that it was worthwhile for him to trek his work across the border to show at Indigo. And this piece in particular, haunts me. The gallery had an archway that was filled in, and John cut a chunk out of the wall and embedded this eye into the wall seamlessly, so there was it just looked like it was there. And connecting to it were these wires, also internal to the wall. But then at the top, where the wall hit the ceiling, was a what am I thinking? An IV drip, right. This huge IV drip. And it slowly released water that traveled down these tubes internally in the wall, and then rested in this eye until enough had collected for it to drop. And it took maybe 3 minutes, and people would just stop and stare, waiting for the tear to drip. And then when it did release and drip, it left this path down the wall. It was just really beautiful. He actually is coming and beginning a new installation at the gallery on Monday, which the artist reception is on June 3rd, so you're all invited. I showed an exhibition of Nava Gadanian, originally from Israel. She was in Buffalo for just a few years, really beautiful paintings, and she now lives and works in New York. David Moog, probably a number of you in the audience have already had your photograph taken by him at the Birchfield. He's involved in a project there, but kind of a purist photographer. This was the last show that we had at 74 Allen Street, and this was Elisabeth Labarge's MFA show, which also was a collaboration between Indigo and the Castellani, where she also hung a series of pieces. And these were really large-scale, gorgeous, dramatic charcoal drawings. Just incredibly detailed and beautifully rendered. So it was at that point when I started thinking, you know, it would be nice to be able to have people stand up straight on the second level, and the possibility of having larger scale installation pieces. And so when a storefront became available, because I did want to stay in Allentown, and this space became available at 47 Allen, and so it was time for a new reinvent, and we got carts and wagons and hauled everything down the block to the next storefront. And Augustina Dross was an early show there. This also was her MFA show. And it was a perfect setting for this work because you really need space to step away from these paintings. They're really intense and beautiful and large. And not only did we have the paintings, but Augustina works from actual objects. So we had a series of formaldehyde animals running down the center of the gallery so that people would know what the sources were for these paintings. And then the September show in this gallery was Felice Koenig and Kevin Kegler, which not only was a nice pairing, but they each did their own work and then actually collaborated on pieces together. So Felice's incredible layered meditations and Kevin's incredible sculptures. And then, unfortunately, I don't have an image of the collaborative works, but Kevin would create the form and Felice would paint on it. And this was just a really beautiful exhibition. And it was, you know, a moment when I knew that I had made a good decision because I never would have been able to show this work at the other space. And it was really a beautiful exhibition. Then I also had the opportunity to show a large collection of the work of Nancy Belfer. I hesitate to call it a retrospective because her work is so, there's so much work, and this was just maybe a survey, just touching on different times and practices along the way, and it was an extraordinary exhibition. This was one of the pieces. So this was coming around November and December when I usually have a group show in the gallery anyway, but I just, you know, felt this compelled to, like, you know, load the space with as much work as I possibly can. And in my mind, I had this, you know, salon style from the ceiling to the floor image, but then I realized that would take a really lot of work in this new tall ceiling space. But this, you know, was an indication of, you know, people's work that I've shown over time and whose work I really love. And, you know, I just wanted people to walk in and kind of gasp. And I think it was pretty successful. Charlie Clough, Annie Hoover, many artists obviously had the work in their show. We had an exhibition of Monica Engel, Confluence. And this was also a partnership. It was connected to trying to bring attention to an organization that does a lot of wonderful things in Buffalo called Partnership for the Public Good. And so Monica's work was hung, and we had a reception for the organization within the space, and it was just a confluence of you know, really powerful things going on at one time. Lynn Northrup, this show that was called Metamorphomation. She does these sculptures of birds, all made from found objects, and she is able to kind of distill the essence of these birds of prey. They're a metaphor for her for all that is fearless and powerful, and they are extraordinary. And you know, the gallery kind of looked like a ornithology museum that had gone off the edge a little bit. It was wonderful. We had a show of George Hughes' work, Collision, really strong paintings dealing with colonialism and violence and translating it into popular imagery it was a really powerful show, and it was a great opening. We also had the work of Dorothy Fitzgerald, also beautiful paintings, some very large scale and very personal narrative embedded into kind of an abstract expressionist. Then we had a show called Cabinet of Curiosities around it was around the time of it was in the summer, and I think there are a lot of questions raised around Cabinet of Curiosities, like when does an object become a piece of art, and is something more powerful in a collection than as an individual object. And so it was a collection of pieces that people had created art, and some found objects that took on the air of being suddenly a piece of art just by their proximity. And Al Volo was included in the exhibition, and he had, wonderful found objects that he embellishes with his little crocheted. There was one that was a Mighty Mouse that included the cape and gloves, and it was amazing. And Ellen Markle's work, who does incredible assemblage pieces, which often have elements that are interactive, either light up or move. We had a show of Joseph Shear's amazing actual scans. These are scans of actual moths and made very, very large, and they're so detailed and intense that you could almost feel the surfaces of the insects. It was really beautiful. And then Bill Stewart, whose work I love. I first saw his work also at the Birchfield, actually, and I've had his work often in the gallery and will do so every time I can. But one time when we had an exhibition of these shaman figures, there were maybe 12 or 13 in the gallery space, and it was my fantasy that every morning when I would come and unlock the door, that they had just recently jumped back on the pedestals. And I felt very much like I was the interloper, and it was their space. They're incredibly powerful. And then recently we had a show with Amy Greenan and Patrick Robideau, which was this incredible combination of work, both of them dealing obviously with forms of buildings, but so much more than that. And then I just wanted to talk just really briefly about the idea of collaborations. So, I just believe really strongly that collaborations provide opportunities to combine forces to have greater impact than any single individual can. And so when Fritz Abel came up with this incredibly courageous idea to have an art fair, Echo Art Fair, I was really happy to participate and be a part of it. And this was the first year it was at the Central Terminal, which I loved that space. It was, just such an incredible contrast between these, stark booths and the decaying beauty of the space. But I participated every year, and this was at Larkin's Square. This was one of the years at the Public Library. And this is the one that we just had last weekend at OSC Manufacturing, which was an incredible venue and an incredible experience, and I hope a lot of you had the opportunity to see it. And speaking of collaborations, so we, Anna Kaplan and Emily Tucker and I have formed a collaboration called Resource Art. And for those of you who are fortunate to hear Anna's Curator talk last month, she described a little bit about it. But this was one of our a major project that we entered into together. This was a preview for the Echo Art Festival, and so all of this work was by artists who either were in this show or had other connections to it. And there were 47 artists, and we packed up all that work and took it to New York and did a pop-up in a gallery in Chelsea, and it was, incredibly exciting, and got an amazing response. So I think the power of a collective presence is really significant. So I think this is a really unique collaboration, 3 independent galleries combining efforts and experience to facilitate connections between artists and audiences, to give voice to the impressive art created in Western New York. And you know, working together with both Anna and Emily has been an incredible experience. And you know, I just think that it speaks to believing strongly and wanting to support and grow Buffalo's arts community. And you know, I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. And so I'm ending this talk. I think, you know, in the process of preparing and reviewing the archives that I've kept over the years, I realized that there were like hundreds and hundreds of images over this time. And I was once again struck by the quality and the quantity of the work that's being produced here. And it's become even clearer to me that when asked, why would you or anyone open a small independent gallery in Buffalo, New York, the answer has to be, we have no choice. We need to work towards connecting art and audience. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much for coming. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you're prepared, but I was interested in your work.
Oh, yeah, I don't have any images of my work right now.
There's some Buffalo News from last Sunday's Gusto.
Okay. Or maybe that's a way of just asking that space in, of being an artist and being a curator. I mean, because there's curators that don't claim to be, aren't
Right.
interested in, haven't had the
Right.
experience.
And I will say, you know, just personally for myself, it's been really challenging. You know, it's, you know, kind of a similar level of devotion that they both take, you know, the idea of curating and running a gallery and creating your own work. And, you know, I'm still working to find a balance to, you know, when I moved to Buffalo, I worked in my studio every day, you know, and it's hard to juggle at this point. But anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.